There's a pattern in the women's health research that kept stopping me. Year after year, study after study, researchers were documenting the same puzzling discrepancy. Women in certain parts of Japan and in indigenous communities in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico were moving through menopause with dramatically fewer of the symptoms that derail the daily lives of millions of women in the United States and Europe. No waking up soaked at 3 a.m. No sudden waves of heat that force you to excuse yourself from a meeting. No feeling like your own body has turned into something you don't recognize. And when researchers dug into why, when they actually looked at what these women ate, how their hormonal metabolism functioned, what their gut microbiomes looked like, the answers were sitting right there in the data. Clear, measurable, reproducible. I'm Dr. Helen Marlowe. I've spent 15 years as a women's health researcher, specifically focused on what happens to the female body after menopause, the mechanisms that change, the systems that shift, and the biological reasons behind symptoms that doctors often describe in a single sentence during a 10-minute appointment. What I'm going to share today comes entirely from peer-reviewed science, published studies, measurable outcomes in real post-menopausal women. Today, I'm walking you through 5 specific foods that the research connects to reduced hot flash frequency and severity, and more broadly to the cellular and metabolic health challenges that define postmenopausal biology. You're going to understand not just what these foods are, but what's happening in your body when you eat them, and why that matters after estrogen drops. That last part, the mechanism, is what most of this conversation leaves out. By the end, you'll have a clear, evidence-grounded protocol, and you'll understand the biological reasons behind it well enough to actually use it. If this kind of evidence-based women's health research is useful to you, subscribing genuinely helps me keep producing it. No pressure, just appreciated. Let's start where the science starts, with a question about your brain. A 2021 investigation published in the journal Menopause, which is, notably, the official journal of the North American Menopause Society, followed 84 post-menopausal women over 12 weeks. These were women experiencing at least 2 moderate to severe hot flashes per day. The researchers divided them into 2 groups. One group continued eating exactly as they normally did. The other group shifted to a specific dietary pattern, a low-fat, plant-based diet with one important addition: half a cup of cooked soybeans every day. The finding that stopped me: the group eating the plant-based diet with soybeans reduced their moderate to severe hot flashes by 88%. Not 18%, 88%. The control group, eating normally, 42% reduction, which itself reflects the significant placebo effect in vasomotor symptom research and is worth keeping in mind. But the gap between those 2 numbers is striking. This was the women's study for the alleviation of vasomotor symptoms, known as the WAVES trial, led by Dr. Neil Barnard and published in Menopause in 2022. It was the second phase of the trial. The first phase, with 38 women, published in 2021, showed a 79% reduction in total hot flashes. Both phases pointed to the same conclusion. Something about this dietary combination was having a measurable, substantial effect on vasomotor symptoms in postmenopausal women. Now, and I'll say this clearly because scientific integrity matters here, the WAVES trial has limitations I want you to know about. The sample sizes are relatively small. Diet studies cannot be blinded the way drug studies can. And the funding source, the Physicians' Committee for Responsible Medicine, has an institutional orientation toward plant-based diets. These are legitimate things to note. But the findings have been consistent across both phases, and the effect size is large enough that it demands attention. The next piece of evidence came from a much larger pool of research. A 2024 systematic review and meta-analysis, meaning researchers pooled the results of 12 separate randomized controlled trials involving 533 postmenopausal and perimenopausal women, examined the overall effect of soy isoflavones on menopausal symptoms. The pooled analysis found a statistically significant effect on vasomotor symptoms, with what statisticians call a Hedges G of -0.25. For non-statisticians, that's a small to moderate but meaningful reduction that appears consistently across studies and populations. A 2012 meta-analysis by Chen and colleagues in Menopause Journal, which pooled 17 randomized controlled trials involving 1,433 women, found that soy isoflavone supplementation reduced hot flash frequency by an average of 1.31 fewer episodes per day compared to placebo. Small in absolute terms, measurable in study terms. The evidence is real, the effect is modest and variable, and there's a biological reason for both of those things. Building on that, researchers began looking at dietary pattern effects beyond just soy. A January 2024 systematic review published in Ames Public Health specifically examined Mediterranean diet interventions in menopausal women. The review found that higher adherence to Mediterranean diet principles was consistently associated with reduced vasomotor symptom intensity and severity, along with improvements in lipid profiles, blood pressure, and body composition. A 2024 cross-sectional study in post-menopausal women found that women with higher fruit consumption, particularly strawberries, pineapple, and melon, were significantly less likely to experience hot flashes. Higher vegetable consumption correlated with reduced hot flash severity. The data is pointing toward a dietary pattern, not a single magic ingredient. But it's also pointing toward specific foods within that pattern that the research highlights with enough consistency to discuss. What's the biological explanation? Stay with me here because this is where it gets genuinely interesting and genuinely useful. Once I understood the research trail, I needed to understand the mechanism. What is actually happening in the body after estrogen drops that makes hot flashes occur at all? And how could something you eat possibly affect a neurological event? The answer involves 5 interconnected processes. Nobody explains them all together. Most women are told, your estrogen is low, so you get hot flashes, which is true in the same way that the engine light is on because something's wrong with your car is true. Technically accurate, completely unhelpful. Here's what's actually happening. The first process I call the thermostat calibration failure. Deep inside your brain, in a region called the hypothalamus, there's a cluster of specialized neurons with a complicated name, KNDY neurons, for kisspeptin neurokinin B dynorphin, whose job is to regulate your body's thermoneutral zone. Think of the thermoneutral zone as the temperature range within which your body stays calm. No sweating, no shivering, just steady equilibrium. Before menopause, estrogen kept these neurons in a state of controlled activity. It maintained the calibration. After menopause, with estrogen gone, these KNDY neurons become hyperactive. They enlarge. They produce excessive amounts of a signaling molecule called neurokinin B. And this narrows the thermoneutral zone, the range of temperatures your body tolerates without triggering a full heat dissipation response, to something approaching 0. Your body's thermostat essentially loses its calibration. A single degree of body temperature fluctuation, a mild emotional stress, a glass of wine, walking into a warm room, any of these can be enough to trigger the alarm. The hypothalamus fires. Blood vessels in the skin dilate. Sweat glands activate. Your face and chest flood with heat. This is not weakness. This is not aging. This is a specific, well-documented neurological consequence of a specific hormonal shift. The reason this matters for our conversation about food is that we now know this pathway intimately enough that a pharmaceutical drug, fezolinetant, FDA approved in 2023, was designed specifically to block neurokinin B receptors and reduce hot flash frequency. If a drug works by targeting this exact pathway, then anything that modulates activity in this pathway is potentially relevant. And this is precisely where certain plant compounds, the phytoestrogens in soybeans, come into the picture. The second process is what I describe as the retirement of the fire marshal. Estrogen is not just a reproductive hormone. It's one of the most potent anti-inflammatory agents in the human body. It suppresses a master switch of inflammation called NF-kappa B. It promotes the production of anti-inflammatory cytokines. It protects the inner walls of blood vessels. It does all of this continuously, systemically, throughout the body. After menopause, this protection is withdrawn. And what researchers observe is a measurable increase in systemic inflammatory markers. Interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, C-reactive protein. These are the chemical fingerprints of low-grade chronic inflammation. Not the acute inflammation of an injury, but the slow-burning kind that quietly accelerates multiple aging processes simultaneously. In postmenopausal women, this inflammatory shift is directly associated with increased vasomotor symptom burden, accelerated cardiovascular risk, cognitive changes, and joint pain. Think of estrogen as the fire marshal who has been walking the building every hour, catching sparks before they become fires. When the fire marshal retires, the sparks don't stop. They accumulate. The building, your body, develops a low-grade smolder that wasn't there before. The question becomes, what takes over? This is the biological mechanism behind the Mediterranean diet's benefit. Fatty fish, extra virgin olive oil, leafy greens, berries. These foods are dense with compounds that have documented anti-inflammatory effects. Omega-3 fatty acids reduce levels of IL-6 and TNF-alpha. Oleocanthal in extra virgin olive oil inhibits the same inflammatory enzyme pathway as ibuprofen. Polyphenols in dark berries and leafy greens reduce oxidative stress and CRP. The volunteer firefighters, in other words. Not as comprehensive or automatic as estrogen was, but measurable and available at every meal. The third process explains why soy specifically, and not just any plant food, appears in the strongest evidence. I call it the skeleton key mechanism. Soy contains compounds called isoflavones, primarily genistein and daidzein. These molecules are structurally similar enough to estradiol, the primary human estrogen, that they can bind to estrogen receptors in the body. Specifically, they have a strong affinity for what are called estrogen receptor beta sites, which are particularly abundant in the brain, the bones, the blood vessels, and the bladder, all the tissues where postmenopausal women experience the most symptoms. Here's the key. Isoflavones are not estrogen. They bind to estrogen receptors, but produce only a fraction of the effect, roughly 1/1000th the potency of estradiol. In a woman of reproductive age with ample circulating estrogen, this is essentially irrelevant. The estrogen receptors are already fully engaged. But in a postmenopausal woman with near-zero endogenous estrogen, the estrogen receptor is like a lock, sitting empty. And a skeleton key that fits 1/1000th as well as the original key suddenly has relative access that it never had before. Think of it this way. Estrogen receptors are specific locks that require a specific key. Before menopause, the original keys, your own estrogen, filled all the locks. After menopause, the original keys disappear. Soy isoflavones are skeleton keys, structurally similar enough to fit, but producing only partial engagement. In a world where there are no original keys left, even partial engagement of certain locks, particularly those KNDY neurons in the hypothalamus, may reduce their hyperactivity, dampen the signal, cool the thermostat response somewhat. This is probably the central mechanism behind the WAVES trial results, and behind the consistent, modest, but real, effect seen in meta-analyses of isoflavone interventions. A caveat that matters. Whether you get the full benefit of soy isoflavones depends significantly on your gut microbiome. Specifically, on whether your gut bacteria include the strains that convert daidzein to equol, a more potent phytoestrogen metabolite. Research suggests that about 25 to 30% of Western women are what scientists call equol producers. Women who produce equol from soy consumption appear to get stronger vasomotor symptom benefits from soy. Women who don't produce equol get less benefit. We don't currently have a widely available clinical test to tell you which group you're in, though the research in this area is moving quickly. The fourth process involves blood sugar, and it's one that almost nobody connects to hot flashes. I call it the destabilized tides. Estrogen improves insulin sensitivity. It supports stable glucose homeostasis. After menopause, when estrogen is withdrawn, postmenopausal women become significantly more susceptible to insulin resistance and blood sugar volatility. This is one reason why the risk of type 2 diabetes rises substantially in the decade after menopause. What research has begun to suggest, and this is a more recent area of investigation, is that glucose availability directly affects hypothalamic function. The KNDY neurons that drive hot flashes are sensitive to metabolic signals, including blood sugar. Sharp drops in blood glucose appear to be able to pull the trigger on hypothalamic heat dissipation responses in susceptible postmenopausal women. A 2025 secondary analysis of the WAVES trial data found that within the group following a plant-based diet, those who consumed more processed foods, even within the overall healthy dietary pattern, reported more frequent and severe hot flashes, not fewer. Blood sugar isn't the whole story of hot flashes, but it's an underappreciated chapter. Think of your blood sugar regulation as ocean tides. Estrogen was the gravitational force that kept the tides predictable. After menopause, that gravitational force weakens. Blood sugar surges and drops become more extreme. High tide, low tide, high tide, low tide. When the tide drops sharply, the hypothalamus can misread the signal and trigger the alarm. Fiber-rich whole foods, legumes, complex carbohydrates. These slow glucose absorption and smooth the tides. Refined sugars and ultra-processed carbohydrates amplify the swings. The fifth and final mechanism brings us back to those gut bacteria, and to a system most women have never heard of, the Estrobolome. Your gut microbiome contains a specific subset of bacteria that produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. This enzyme activates estrogens that have been processed by the liver and sent to the gut for excretion, reactivating them and allowing them to re-enter circulation. Scientists call this subset of bacteria the Estrobolome, and it functions essentially as a hormone recycling system. In postmenopausal women, who are producing near zero estrogen from the ovaries, this recycling system becomes proportionally more important. What little estrogenic activity is available comes increasingly from three sources: the adrenal glands, peripheral conversion of androgens in fat tissue, and the gut's recycling of phytoestrogens and residual estrogen metabolites. Menopause itself changes the gut microbiome composition, reducing diversity and depleting some of the bacterial strains that support the estrobolome. What fuels healthy gut bacteria? Fiber, fermented foods, diverse plant foods. What depletes them? Ultra-processed food, refined sugar, and low dietary diversity. The recycling facility runs on fiber, in other words, and most women in their 60s are consuming less than half the fiber intake that research suggests supports a healthy postmenopausal microbiome. These five mechanisms: thermostat calibration failure, the retirement of the fire marshal, the skeleton key, the destabilized tides, and the gut recycling system, don't operate independently. They form an interconnected biological landscape. And the 5 foods I'm about to walk you through address different pieces of that landscape, with different levels of evidence and through different pathways. I've shown you the research and mapped the mechanisms. The question I hear most from women after going through this material: okay, Dr. Marlowe, so what do I actually eat? Here is what the evidence supports, organized by the strength of the science and the clarity of the biological mechanism. Before I walk through these, I want to say something directly. The 2023 position statement on non-hormone therapy from the North American Menopause Society classified dietary modifications, including soy foods, as having insufficient evidence to make a formal clinical recommendation for vasomotor symptom management. This is scientifically honest. The WAVES trial is promising, and the 2024 meta-analyses are meaningful. But the evidence base is not yet at the level of, say, cognitive behavioral therapy or certain medications for hot flashes. What I'm describing is an evidence-informed dietary approach grounded in plausible mechanisms and consistent observational and interventional data. Not a pharmaceutical prescription, not a guaranteed cure. A pattern that the best available science supports for women in this demographic. With that said, let's get specific. The first priority, with the strongest direct evidence, is whole soybeans. Not soy protein powder, not soy milk, not heavily processed soy products. Whole soybeans. Edamame, cooked soybeans added to salads or soups, unseasoned boiled soybeans as a side. The WAVES trial used specifically half a cup of cooked soybeans per day, which delivers approximately 40 to 55 milligrams of isoflavones. This is broadly consistent with traditional soy consumption in Japanese populations, and with the dosing used in the isoflavone meta-analyses showing benefit. Why whole soybeans specifically, rather than the processed forms? The WAVES trial combined whole soybeans with an overall plant-based dietary pattern, and secondary analyses suggest the food matrix matters. The fiber, the protein, the isoflavone profile in whole soybeans together produce effects that processed soy isolates may not fully replicate. This likely connects to the gut microbiome mechanism. The fiber in whole soybeans feeds the bacterial strains that convert isoflavones to equal and other active metabolites. The target is roughly 40 to 80 milligrams of isoflavones daily. Half a cup of cooked soybeans gets you there. The timeline from the WAVES trial. Measurable changes in hot flash frequency began appearing within the first 4 weeks, with the most significant reduction at the 12-week mark. One critical note on soy safety. Women with a history of hormone-receptor-positive breast cancer, or who are currently taking tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors, should have this conversation with their oncologist before significantly increasing soy intake. NAMS considers soy in food form to be generally safe for most breast cancer survivors. But this is a decision that requires individual medical guidance, not a YouTube video. Also, if you take levothyroxine for thyroid conditions, soy can impair the drug's absorption. Take your thyroid medication at least 4 hours apart from soy-containing meals. The second priority is fatty fish. And here I want to be precise about what the evidence does and doesn't show, because the distinction matters. Omega-3 fatty acids and hot flash frequency. The evidence is genuinely mixed. A 2023 systematic review in Nutrients examined 9 randomized controlled trials of omega-3 supplementation in post-menopausal women. 4 of the 9 studies suggested potential benefit for vasomotor symptoms. 2 showed no significant effect. The review's conclusion was that the evidence is insufficient to recommend omega-3 specifically for hot flash management. What the evidence does show very clearly is something equally important for women after 50. Estrogen loss dramatically accelerates cardiovascular risk. The lipid protective and anti-inflammatory effects of omega-3 fatty acids in postmenopausal women are documented across multiple studies. The Mediterranean Diet Systematic Review found consistent reductions in triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, blood pressure, and inflammatory markers in menopausal women following Mediterranean pattern eating that includes regular fatty fish. So frame fatty fish not as a hot flash remedy, but as the dietary tool that addresses the cardiovascular vulnerability that estrogen used to provide. 2 to 3 servings per week of salmon, sardines, mackerel, or herring. These are the low-mercury, high EPA and DHA options the research consistently highlights. Sardines are underrated. They're among the most nutrient-dense foods available. And because they're eaten whole, including the small bones, they deliver calcium alongside their omega-3s, a meaningful bonus for postmenopausal bone health. If you're on blood thinners, warfarin, Eliquis, Xarelto, Plavix, very high-dose omega-3 supplementation can increase bleeding risk. Whole food fish at the 2 to 3 servings per week level is generally safe, but discuss changes with your prescriber if you're on anticoagulant therapy. The third food is extra virgin olive oil, and the mechanism here runs through the inflammation pathway, the retirement of the fire marshal. A 2024 Australian cross-sectional study in menopausal women found that higher extra virgin olive oil consumption was directly associated with lower psychological menopausal symptom scores. The broader Mediterranean diet literature consistently shows EVOO reducing CRP, IL-6, and TNF-alpha, the exact inflammatory markers that rise after estrogen withdrawal. The specific compound responsible for much of this effect is oleocanthal, which inhibits cyclooxygenase enzymes, the same pathway targeted by ibuprofen and aspirin. Extra virgin olive oil consumed regularly is providing low-grade anti-inflammatory support at every meal. 2 to 4 tablespoons daily as your primary cooking and dressing fat, replacing butter, processed vegetable oils, and margarine. The key word is extra virgin. Olive oil, light olive oil, and pure olive oil are refined products with dramatically lower polyphenol content. The evidence for extra virgin olive oil's anti-inflammatory effects does not transfer to the refined versions. One note on calories. Olive oil is calorie-dense. The evidence-based recommendation is to replace other fats with EVOO, not add it on top of them. This matters because weight loss itself, even modest weight loss, is one of the few interventions NAMS recommends with level 1 evidence for reducing vasomotor symptoms. The fourth food is ground flaxseed. And I'm going to be direct with you about something the internet tends to gloss over. The evidence for flaxseed specifically reducing hot flashes is not strong. The largest and highest quality randomized controlled trial on this question, a Phase 3 double-blind trial from the Mayo Clinic published in Menopause in 2012 with 188 post-menopausal women, found no statistically significant difference between flaxseed and placebo for hot flash frequency or severity. The flaxseed group had a 33% reduction. The placebo group had a 29% reduction. Not meaningful. I tell you this not to dismiss flaxseed, but because you deserve the actual evidence rather than a curated selection of supporting studies. Here's what flaxseed does have legitimate evidence for. It's the richest dietary source of lignans, precursors to phytoestrogens that gut bacteria convert to enterolactone and enterodiol. It has meaningful cardiovascular benefits through its alpha-linolenic acid content. It provides significant soluble fiber that supports the gut microbiome and blood sugar stability. And preliminary research suggests it may play a role in hormonal estrogen metabolism that could reduce certain estrogen-dependent cancer risks. So the honest framing for flaxseed is, include it for its documented effects on gut microbiome health, blood sugar stability, cardiovascular support, and hormonal metabolism, not as a primary hot flash intervention. 1 to 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed daily, stirred into yogurt, oatmeal, or a smoothie. Ground, not whole. Whole flaxseed passes through the digestive system largely intact and doesn't deliver its bioactive compounds. Store ground flaxseed in the refrigerator to prevent oxidation of its oils. The fifth category is dark leafy greens and berries, which I group together because they work through overlapping mechanisms and represent the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory foundation of this dietary approach. After estrogen withdrawal, oxidative stress in multiple tissues accelerates. Estrogen was doing work as an antioxidant throughout the body, in neurons, blood vessels, bone cells, and skin. After menopause, that protective function disappears. The observable consequence is accelerated aging in tissues that estrogen previously shielded. Leafy greens, spinach, kale, Swiss chard, collard greens, arugula, provide several things postmenopausal women specifically need. Magnesium, which supports sleep quality disrupted in menopause by hot flashes and declining estrogen. Vitamin K2, important for directing calcium to bones rather than arteries. Folate, and a dense array of polyphenols with anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. Berries. Blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries are among the most polyphenol-dense foods available. The cross-sectional study I mentioned earlier found that women with higher berry and fruit intake had measurably lower hot flash frequency and severity. The mechanism is likely anti-inflammatory and antioxidant rather than phytoestrogen-based, though some berry compounds do have weak estrogenic activity. 2 or more cups of leafy greens daily and roughly half to 1 cup of berries. These are achievable targets with almost no contraindications for most women. For women on warfarin, the vitamin K in leafy greens interacts with anticoagulation. Keep intake consistent rather than dramatically changing it. And if you have a history of calcium oxalate kidney stones, moderate your intake of high oxalate greens like spinach and Swiss chard and discuss with your doctor. From a practical standpoint, after 15 years studying dietary interventions in women, here is what the evidence consistently shows makes a difference in implementation. The all-or-nothing approach fails. The research on dietary adherence in women over 50 shows that gradual, sustainable changes consistently outperform dramatic overhauls. Adding half a cup of soybeans to a salad you already make is achievable. Redesigning your entire diet overnight is not sustainable for most people. The combination matters more than any single food. None of these 5 foods works in isolation with anything like the effect that the combined dietary pattern shows. The WAVES trial worked because it was soybeans plus a plant-forward anti-inflammatory dietary pattern. The Mediterranean diet studies work because multiple mechanisms are addressed simultaneously. What you remove may matter as much as what you add. Multiple analyses found that refined sugar, ultra-processed foods, and high saturated fat intake were independently associated with worse vasomotor and overall menopausal symptom burden. Reducing these appears to compound the benefits of adding the supportive foods. And timing is worth noting. The WAVES trial showed meaningful changes within 12 weeks. Inflammatory marker improvements from dietary changes typically appear within 4 to 8 weeks. Give this approach 3 months before assessing its impact on your symptoms, not 3 weeks. Now, an important question I hear regularly. What if I'm already on hormone replacement therapy? Does any of this still apply? Yes, and possibly more so. The dietary pattern described here addresses the non-VMS aspects of post-menopausal health that HRT alone doesn't fully cover. Gut microbiome health, long-term cardiovascular protection through anti-inflammatory mechanisms, blood sugar stability, and antioxidant support. Several researchers have noted that women on HRT who also follow anti-inflammatory dietary patterns show better overall cardiometabolic outcomes than women on HRT alone. These approaches are complementary, not competing. If you're not on HRT and you're evaluating whether to start, that conversation belongs with a qualified healthcare provider, ideally one with specific training in menopause medicine. NAMS has a directory of certified menopause practitioners. The dietary approach I've described is not a substitute for HRT for women who need it. They work through different mechanisms and address different aspects of the postmenopausal body. How long until you notice changes? Based on the studies, in weeks 1 and 2, expect adjustment. More fiber means digestive changes before benefits. Some blood sugar stabilization begins. In weeks 3 and 4, the first gut microbiome shifts occur. Some women report modest reduction in hot flash frequency. Month 2 is when anti-inflammatory benefits begin to manifest. WAVES trial participants showed measurable hot flash reduction by week 8. By month 3, the WAVES trial endpoint, the most significant changes in hot flash frequency and severity appeared. Cardiovascular markers began improving. Months 3 through 6 bring the full cardiovascular benefits of sustained Mediterranean-style eating, along with bone density support and sustained microbiome improvement. When to seek immediate medical attention. Any postmenopausal bleeding requires evaluation. It's never normal and always warrants a call to your doctor. If you experience hot flashes accompanied by chest pain, heart palpitations, or extreme dizziness, these are not typical vasomotor symptoms and need medical evaluation. New breast changes, severe headache, or sudden vision changes, these are not symptoms to address with dietary intervention. In 15 years of studying postmenopausal women's health, the thing that has struck me most consistently is not how little control women have over what their bodies do after menopause. It's how much the research has documented that is actionable, and how poorly that information reaches the women who need it. You have been given, at best, a partial picture. Hot flashes are low estrogen. Bone loss is low estrogen. Take this medication or don't. See you in a year. What you've rarely been given is the mechanism, the actual biological story of what's happening in your hypothalamus, your gut, your blood vessels, your cells, and therefore the coherent explanation for why specific, targeted changes in what you eat can produce measurable effects on real symptoms. We started today with a puzzle. Why do women in certain populations move through menopause so differently? The research revealed 5 interconnected mechanisms: a thermostat that lost its calibration, the retirement of the body's fire marshal, a lock that's lost its key and is reaching for skeleton keys, blood sugar tides that have lost their gravitational anchor, and a gut recycling system running low on fuel. And the 5 foods we discussed address these mechanisms through pathways that are biologically coherent and research-supported. whole soybeans for the phytoestrogen mechanism, fatty fish and extra virgin olive oil for the inflammatory mechanism, ground flaxseed for gut microbiome and hormonal metabolism support, and dark leafy greens and berries for the antioxidant and cellular health foundation. Navigating health information as a woman over 50 is genuinely hard. A lot of it is noise. A lot of it is not designed with your specific biology in mind. Post-menopausal physiology is not the same as perimenopausal physiology, which is not the same as male aging, which is not the same as generic, healthy aging content. The fact that you're here, seeking the actual mechanisms rather than accepting it's just your age, that matters. Your body after menopause is not declining randomly. It is responding to a specific, predictable hormonal shift through specific, well-mapped biological mechanisms. Understanding those mechanisms gives you something far more useful than a list of supplements. It gives you the ability to make choices that are genuinely connected to the biology you're trying to support. If this topic interests you, my video on bone density and postmenopausal metabolism goes deeper into the skeletal changes that begin in the years around menopause. It's one of the most underestimated aspects of postmenopausal health and connects directly to the dietary patterns we discussed today. Leave a comment below with your biggest takeaway, or the question I didn't answer. I read all of them. Your questions are what guide what I research next. Keep investigating your health. I'll see you in the next one. Dr. Marlowe.